The clock on the wall showed 2:15 a.m., but Sophie wasn't looking at it anymore. She'd stopped checking the time hours ago. Her 6-month-old daughter, Mia, had been crying for what felt like forever, and nothing seemed to help. Sophie walked back and forth across the tiny apartment, bouncing the baby gently, humming the same lullaby for the 100th time that night. The apartment was small, really small. Just one room that served as bedroom, living room, and kitchen all at once. The paint was peeling in the corners and the heater made strange noises, but it was home. It was all Sophie could afford, and even this was a stretch most months. She looked down at Mia's red, tear-stained face and felt her heart break a little more. The baby was hungry. Sophie knew that cry. It was different from the tired cry or the uncomfortable cry. This was the hungry cry, and it made Sophie want to cry too. Walking over to the small kitchen counter, she picked up the formula container and shook it. Almost empty. Maybe enough for one more bottle, too, if she stretched it thin. Her stomach twisted with worry. It was still 5 days until payday, and her bank account had exactly $47.32 in it. She checked 3 times that evening, hoping somehow the number would magically change. Sophie mixed the formula carefully, making sure to get every last bit from the container. She tested the temperature on her wrist like the nurse had shown her at the hospital, then offered the bottle to Mia. The baby latched on immediately, her crying stopping as she drank. The sudden silence in the apartment was almost startling. Sitting down in the worn armchair that had come with the apartment, Sophie watched her daughter eat. Mia's tiny hand wrapped around Sophie's finger, holding on tight. Despite everything, despite the stress and the exhaustion and the constant worry about money, moments like this made it all worth it. This little person depended on her completely, and Sophie would do anything to take care of her. But anything wasn't always enough when you didn't have money. 3 years ago, Sophie's life had been completely different. She'd been engaged to a man named Daniel Westbrook. Not just any man. Daniel's family owned Westbrook Technologies, one of the biggest tech companies in the country. They had more money than Sophie could even imagine. Private jets, vacation homes, designer everything. For a while, Sophie thought she'd found her fairy tale. Daniel was kind to her. He made her laugh. He said he loved her and she believed him. They'd met at a coffee shop where Sophie worked during college. He came in every morning for his usual order, and eventually he asked her out. 6 months later, he proposed, but Daniel's mother, Catherine Westbrook, had other plans. To her, Sophie was nobody, just a poor girl from a working-class family who wasn't good enough for her son. Catherine made that very clear at every family dinner, every holiday gathering. She'd smile her cold smile and make little comments about Sophie's clothes, her education, her background. Then one day, Catherine showed up at Sophie's apartment with a lawyer and a check for $50,000. The message was simple. Take the money, sign the papers, and disappear from Daniel's life forever. If Sophie refused, Catherine promised to make her life miserable. She had the power and the lawyers to do it. Sophie was pregnant. She'd just found out that week. She hadn't told Daniel yet because she wanted to plan the perfect way to share the news. But sitting there with Catherine's cold eyes on her and that check on the table, Sophie realized she couldn't win this fight. Catherine would take Daniel away from her. She'd probably take the baby too once it was born. Rich people like the Westbrooks always got what they wanted, so Sophie took the money. She signed the papers that said she'd never contact Daniel again, never tell anyone he was the father, never ask for anything from the Westbrook family. Then she left. She moved to a different part of the city, changed her phone number, and tried to disappear just like Catherine wanted. The $50,000 went fast. Pregnancy medical bills, the hospital delivery, setting up the apartment, buying everything a baby needs. Sophie tried to make it last, but babies are expensive. Formula, diapers, clothes that Mia kept growing out of every few weeks. Now the money was gone and Sophie was on her own. She worked 2 jobs. During the day, she waited tables at a diner downtown. The tips were okay on good days, terrible on bad days. At night, after Mia went to sleep, Sophie did data entry work on her laptop for a company that let her work from home. She'd type until her eyes burned and her fingers ached, usually until 2 or 3 in the morning. Then Mia would wake up hungry, and the whole cycle would start again. Sophie had exactly 2 friends in the city. Her roommate from college, Jessica, had moved away for a better job 6 months ago. That left Rachel, another server at the diner who had 3 kids of her own. Rachel helped when she could, but she was struggling too. Tonight, watching Mia finish her bottle, Sophie felt desperate in a way she hadn't felt before. The formula container was empty now. She had $47 to last 5 more days, and she still needed diapers, food for herself, and money for the bus to get to work. She could skip meals. She'd done that before. But she couldn't let her baby go hungry. Sophie grabbed her phone from the arm of the chair and opened her messages. Her fingers shook a little from exhaustion as she scrolled to Rachel's name. She hated asking for help, hated it, but sometimes being a mother meant swallowing your pride. She typed out the message. "Hey, I'm so sorry to ask this, but could I borrow $200 until Friday? Need to get formula and I'm completely broke. Promise I'll pay you back as soon as I get paid." Sophie read it over twice, feeling her cheeks burn with embarrassment even though Rachel couldn't see her. Then she hit send, except she didn't send it to Rachel. In her exhausted, stressed-out state, her finger had slipped. She'd scrolled one name too far up in her contacts. The message went to a number she'd kept in her phone for 3 years, even though she'd never planned to use it. A number she should have deleted a long time ago but somehow couldn't bring herself to erase. Daniel's number. Sophie didn't realize her mistake right away. She set the phone down and carried Mia to the small crib in the corner of the room. The baby was milk-drunk now, her eyes heavy and finally peaceful. Sophie laid her down gently, covering her with the soft blanket Rachel had given her as a baby gift. Then her phone rang. The sound made Sophie jump. She grabbed it quickly, not wanting to wake Mia. The screen showed an unknown number, but somehow Sophie knew. Her heart started pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. With shaking hands, she answered, "Hello?" The voice on the other end was one she hadn't heard in 3 years. Deeper now, tired-sounding but unmistakable. "Sophie? Is this really you?" "Daniel." Sophie couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The room started spinning. I didn't mean to," she started to say, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Who's Mia?" Daniel asked. His voice was tight, controlled, like he was trying very hard to stay calm. "Sophie, answer me." "Who is Mia?" Sophie looked at her sleeping daughter, at those tiny features that looked so much like Daniel's, at the small nose and the shape of her eyes that Sophie saw every day and tried not to think about. "I have to go," Sophie whispered. "Don't you dare hang up," Daniel said, and now his voice was shaking. "Is she mine? Sophie, is Mia my daughter?" The question hung in the air between them. Sophie opened her mouth to lie, to say it was all a mistake to protect herself and her daughter from the Westbrook family and their money and their power. But she was so tired. Tired of lying. Tired of struggling alone. Tired of pretending that Mia didn't have a father out there who deserved to know she existed. The silence stretched on. Daniel didn't say anything else. He was waiting. Finally, Sophie's phone buzzed with a notification. She pulled it away from her ear to look at the screen. A message from her bank app. She opened it with numb fingers. Transfer received $1,000. Below it, a text message from Daniel appeared. "No more cheap formula. Stay where you are. I'm coming home. We need to talk about everything." Sophie's legs gave out. She sank down onto the floor, her back against the wall, staring at her phone screen. $1 million. He'd just sent her $1 million like it was nothing. And he was coming. After 3 years of silence, Daniel Westbrook was coming back into her life, and nothing would ever be the same again. Daniel Westbrook sat in a conference room on the 42nd floor of a hotel in Shanghai, surrounded by 12 board members who were waiting for his decision on a merger worth $300 million. But he wasn't looking at the presentations on the screen anymore. He was staring at his phone, reading a text message that had just turned his entire world upside down. "Please, I just need $200 for formula. Mia won't stop crying. I promise I'll pay you back next week, Sophie." After 3 years of silence, Sophie had texted him. And she had a baby. A baby who needed formula. A baby named Mia. Daniel's mind raced, doing math he didn't want to do. 3 years since they'd broken up. If the baby was 6 months old, based on the age when babies typically still used formula constantly, that meant Sophie had been pregnant when they split. She'd been pregnant and she'd never told him. His hands started shaking. The men and women around the table were talking, asking him questions, but their voices sounded like they were coming from underwater. All Daniel could hear was the rushing of blood in his ears. "Excuse me," he said, standing up so abruptly his chair rolled backward. Continue without me. Sign whatever you think is best." He walked out of the conference room, ignoring the shocked faces behind him. His assistant Kevin jumped up from his seat outside the door. "Sir, is everything okay?" "The merger. I don't care about the merger right now," Daniel said, pulling out his phone. His fingers fumbled as he called Sophie's number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He thought she might not answer. Why would she after 3 years? But then she picked up. "Hello?" Her voice was small, scared. It was the voice of someone who'd just realized they'd made a terrible mistake. "Sophie? Is this really you?" Daniel tried to keep his voice steady, but he could hear it shaking. There was silence on the other end. He could hear breathing, and in the background the faint sound of a baby cooing softly. I didn't mean to." Sophie started, but she couldn't seem to finish the sentence. Daniel closed his eyes. "Who's Mia?" He forced himself to ask the question, even though he was terrified of the answer. "Sophie, answer me. Who is Mia?" More silence. Daniel waited, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his chest. He knew. Somehow he already knew, but he needed to hear her say it. "I have to go," Sophie whispered. Panic shot through Daniel. "Don't you dare hang up," he said, his voice cracking. "Is she mine?" "Sophie, is Mia my daughter?" The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Daniel stood in the hotel hallway, frozen, while business people walked past him speaking in Mandarin and English, while his entire life waited on the other end of a phone line halfway around the world. Sophie didn't answer with words, but her silence told him everything. Daniel pulled the phone away from his ear and opened his banking app with shaking fingers. He didn't even look at the amount. He just transferred money. A lot of it. Enough that Sophie would never have to worry about formula or rent or anything else while he figured this out. Then he sent her a text. "No more cheap formula. Stay where you are. I'm coming home. We need to talk about everything." He called Kevin over. "Get me on the next flight to New York. I don't care what it costs or whose plane we have to charter. I need to be in the air in the next hour." Kevin, who'd worked for Daniel for 5 years and had learned not to ask too many questions, just nodded and started making calls. The flight back to New York took 14 hours. Daniel didn't sleep. He couldn't. He kept replaying every moment of his relationship with Sophie in his mind. The day they met at that coffee shop near his office. The way she'd laughed at his terrible jokes. The night he'd proposed, down on one knee in Central Park while it was snowing, and she'd cried and said yes. And then he thought about the day it all fell apart. His mother had called him into her office at Westbrook Technologies headquarters. She'd sat behind her massive desk with that look on her face, the one that meant she'd made a decision and expected everyone else to fall in line. "Daniel, we need to discuss your engagement," she'd said. "There's nothing to discuss," Daniel had replied. "I love Sophie. We're getting married next spring." His mother had slid a folder across the desk. "She's not suitable for this family. I've done extensive research into her background. Her father was in prison for fraud. Her mother works 3 jobs just to make ends meet. The girl has nothing to offer you except problems." "I don't care about any of that," Daniel had said, pushing the folder back without looking at it. "I love her." "Love," his mother had said, like the word tasted bad in her mouth. "You're 29 years old and you're about to take over a billion-dollar company. You need a wife who understands that world, someone from a good family who can help you navigate society, handle the pressure." This girl serves coffee for a living. They'd argued for hours. Finally, his mother had played her final card. "If you marry her, I'll remove you from the company." "Your father agrees with me." "You'll lose everything." Daniel had been furious, but he'd also been young and stupid, and convinced he could make his mother see reason. He'd asked Sophie for some time, told her they needed to postpone the wedding for a few months while he worked things out with his family. He'd promised her that everything would be okay, but then Sophie had stopped answering his calls. When he'd gone to her apartment, the landlord said she'd moved out. She'd blocked his number, deleted her social media, disappeared completely. He'd hired investigators to find her, but they'd come up empty. It was like she'd vanished. Daniel had been heartbroken, then angry, then eventually numb. He'd thrown himself into work, took over the company when his father retired, made Westbrook Technologies even more successful. He dated other women, the kind his mother approved of, but none of them were Sophie. None of them made him feel alive the way she had, and now he knew why she'd left. She'd been pregnant with his child and something had happened. Something involving his mother, probably. Catherine Westbrook didn't lose, and she didn't accept people she considered beneath her family. The plane finally landed at 6 in the morning, New York time. Daniel hadn't showered, hadn't changed out of his suit from the meeting in Shanghai. He looked terrible, but he didn't care. He had the driver take him straight to the address Sophie had texted from. The neighborhood wasn't what he expected. It wasn't dangerous exactly, but it was worn down. Old buildings with cracked sidewalks. A bodega on the corner with barred windows. This was where Sophie had been living while he'd been flying around the world in private jets. He found her apartment building and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled like someone was cooking breakfast, and he could hear a television playing somewhere. He stood outside apartment 3C for a full minute, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he knocked. The door opened slowly, just a crack. Sophie's face appeared in the gap, and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. She looked exhausted. Beautiful, but exhausted. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She wasn't wearing any makeup, and there were dark circles under her eyes. But she was still the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Daniel," she whispered. "You actually came." "Of course I came," he said. "Sophie, can I come in, please?" She hesitated, then opened the door wider. Daniel stepped into the tiny apartment, and his heart broke a little. This was where she'd been living. This tiny space that was barely bigger than his closet back home. He could see everything from where he stood. The small kitchen with its old appliances, the worn furniture, the crib in the corner. The crib. Daniel walked toward it like he was in a trance. Inside, a baby slept peacefully, wrapped in a pink blanket. She had dark hair, and when she shifted slightly in her sleep, Daniel saw her face. She had his eyes, the same gray-green color that everyone in his family had, the same eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. "Oh my God," he breathed. His legs felt weak, and he had to grab onto the side of the crib to steady himself. "She's mine. She's really mine. Her name is Mia Catherine," Sophie said quietly from behind him. "She's 6.5 months old. She likes music, especially when I sing to her. She's just learning to sit up on her own. Her favorite food is mashed bananas, and she has this little laugh that sounds like hiccups." Daniel turned around, and Sophie was surprised to see tears running down his face. "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me? How could you keep her from me?" Sophie's own eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to tell you. Every single day I wanted to tell you." "Then why didn't you?" Daniel demanded. "Do you have any idea what you took from me? I missed everything. Her birth, her first smile, her first laugh. I missed all of it, Sophie. Those are moments I can never get back. Your mother paid me to leave." Sophie suddenly shouted, then immediately covered her mouth, remembering the sleeping baby. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter but shaking with emotion. "Your mother came to my apartment with a lawyer and a check for $50,000. She made me sign papers saying I'd never contact you again. Never tell anyone you were the father. She said if I didn't cooperate, she'd destroy me. She'd take the baby away from me once it was born. And I believed her, Daniel. Your family has money and power, and I'm nobody. I was scared." Daniel felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. His mother. Of course it was his mother. What did the papers say exactly? "I signed an NDA. It's in my drawer." Sophie walked over to a small dresser and pulled out a folder. "I'm probably breaking it right now just by talking to you. Your mother could sue me for everything." Daniel took the folder and flipped through the papers. His hands were shaking with rage. His mother hadn't just paid Sophie to leave. She'd legally threatened her, put her in a position where she had no choice but to disappear. "She had no right," Daniel said. "These papers are garbage. You were under duress when you signed them. No court would uphold this." "You don't understand," Sophie said. "I'm not like you. I can't afford lawyers. I can barely afford formula. Your mother knew that. She knew I couldn't fight her." Daniel looked at Sophie, then at the crib where his daughter slept, then back at Sophie. His mind was racing with so many emotions he couldn't process them all. Rage at his mother. Grief for everything he'd missed. Joy that he had a daughter. Fear that he'd lost 3 years he could never get back. "I need to make a phone call," he said, pulling out his phone. "Sophie, do you trust me?" Sophie looked at him for a long moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I want to. But I'm scared." "Don't be," Daniel said. "I'm going to fix this. All of it." He dialed his mother's personal cell phone. She answered on the second ring. "Daniel, why are you calling so early? Aren't you supposed to be in Shanghai?" "I'm in New York," Daniel said, his voice cold. I'm standing in Sophie's apartment looking at my 6-month-old daughter that you knew about and hid from me. There was silence on the other end of the line. Mother, you have 24 hours to resign from the board of Westbrook Technologies. If you don't, I'm calling every news outlet in the country and telling them exactly what you did. I have the NDA you forced Sophie to sign. I have everything. Daniel, you don't understand, his mother started. No, Daniel interrupted. You don't understand. I just found out I have a daughter you kept from me. There's nothing you can say that will make this okay. Resign or I destroy everything you've built. Your choice. He hung up. Sophie stared at him with wide eyes. Daniel, she'll come after me. She won't, Daniel said firmly, because you're under my protection now. Both of you. He walked over to her and took her hands. They were shaking. Sophie, I know I can't fix 3 years in one day. I know you're scared and you have every right to be. But I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be in my daughter's life, and I'm going to make sure you never have to worry about money or my mother or anything else ever again. A small cry came from the crib. Mia was waking up, can I? Daniel's voice caught. Can I hold her? Sophie nodded, tears streaming down her face now. She walked to the crib and gently picked up the baby, who was starting to fuss. Then she turned and carefully placed Mia in Daniel's arms. The moment his daughter settled against his chest, everything else disappeared. The anger, the hurt, the lost time, all that mattered was this tiny person who was half him and half Sophie. This little girl who didn't know him yet but would. He'd make sure of it. Mia looked up at him with those gray-green eyes, yawned, and then reached up with one tiny hand to grab his finger. Daniel felt something break open in his chest. Love. Pure, overwhelming, instant love for this little person he'd just met. Hi, Mia, he whispered. I'm your dad, and I promise you I'm never going to miss another day. 3 days had passed since Daniel showed up at Sophie's apartment, and nothing felt real yet. Sophie kept expecting to wake up and find out it had all been a dream. The $1 million in her bank account. Daniel sitting on her worn-out couch, learning how to burp Mia after feeding her. The way her daughter seemed to recognize something in him, going quiet and content in his arms. But it was real. All of it. Daniel hadn't gone back to his penthouse apartment in Manhattan. Instead, he'd done something completely unexpected. He'd bought the apartment directly across the hall from Sophie's. The tenant, an elderly man named Mr. Chen, had been planning to move in with his daughter anyway, so Daniel made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Within 48 hours, Daniel Westbrook, Billionaire CEO, was living in a small one-bedroom apartment in a building with broken elevator buttons and a landlord who never fixed anything on time. Sophie watched him carry boxes up the stairs, refusing help from the movers he'd hired. He was determined to do everything himself, like he was trying to prove something, maybe to her, maybe to himself. You don't have to live here, Sophie said, standing in her doorway while Daniel unpacked in the apartment across the hall. You have a beautiful place downtown. This building doesn't even have a doorman. Daniel looked up from the box he was opening. His hair was messy, his expensive shirt was untucked, and he had dust on his cheek. Sophie had never seen him look less like a billionaire and more like a regular person. I missed 6 months of my daughter's life, he said quietly. I'm not missing another day. If she's here, I'm here. Sophie's heart did something complicated in her chest. She wanted to trust this. Trust him. But 3 years of struggling alone had taught her not to rely on anyone. What about your work? She asked. You can't just abandon your company. I'm not abandoning it. I'm working from home. He gestured to the laptop and monitors he was setting up on a small desk by the window. Kevin is handling the day-to-day operations. I take video calls when Mia's napping. It's fine. It wasn't fine, Sophie thought. It was crazy. But she didn't argue. Instead, she went back to her apartment and tried to process everything that was happening. The next morning, Daniel knocked on her door at 7 a.m. He was holding 2 cups of coffee and a bag from the bakery down the street. I didn't know how you take your coffee anymore, he admitted, looking almost nervous. So I got cream and sugar on the side. And I got those blueberry muffins you used to love. I don't know if you still like them. Sophie took the coffee and their fingers brushed. She pulled back quickly, ignoring the way her skin tingled. I still like them. Thank you. They fell into a routine without planning to. Daniel would come over in the mornings with breakfast. He'd hold Mia while Sophie took a shower, the first real shower she'd had in months where she didn't have to rush because the baby was crying. He learned how to change diapers, though his first few attempts were disasters that left them both laughing. He'd stay through the day, working on his laptop while Mia played on her mat, and he'd look up every few minutes just to watch her. Sophie went back to work at the diner, even though Daniel had offered her money. She wasn't ready to depend on him completely. Not yet, but he'd hired a babysitter, a kind older woman named Mrs. Rodriguez who lived in the building, to watch Mia during Sophie's shifts. When Sophie came home exhausted with sore feet, Daniel would have dinner waiting. Sometimes it was takeout, sometimes it was his terrible attempts at cooking that made her laugh, but it was always there. It felt like playing house, like pretending they were a normal family. Sophie kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped on Friday evening. Sophie was giving Mia a bath in the small bathroom sink when she heard aggressive knocking on the door. Not Daniel's usual gentle knock. This was demanding, angry. "Stay here," Sophie said to Mia, even though the baby couldn't understand. She wrapped her in a towel and went to the door, looking through the peephole. Her blood ran cold. Catherine Westbrook stood in the hallway, perfectly dressed in a designer suit, looking completely out of place in the dingy corridor. Two men in expensive suits stood behind her. Lawyers, probably. Sophie's hand started shaking. This was what she'd been afraid of. What she'd known would happen eventually. She opened the door slowly, keeping the chain lock on. "Hello, Sophie," Catherine said, her voice cold and controlled. "We need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you," Sophie replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, I think you do. You've been violating the NDA you signed. You've involved my son in your schemes, and now you're living off his charity and—" "She's not living off my charity," Daniel's voice cut through the hallway. He'd come out of his apartment and his face was dark with anger. "She's the mother of my child, and you need to leave." Catherine turned to her son, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Hurt maybe, or anger. "Daniel, you don't understand what you're doing. This girl has a name," Daniel said, his voice sharp as glass. "Her name is Sophie, and that little girl in there is your granddaughter. Her name is Mia. You should try learning their names before you come here making threats." "I'm trying to protect you," Catherine said, and for the first time, her voice wavered slightly. "This family has enemies, people who would use a situation like this against us. If word gets out that you have an illegitimate child—" "Don't call her that," Daniel said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Don't ever call my daughter that." Sophie stood frozen behind her door, holding Mia close. The baby was starting to fuss, sensing the tension in the air. "I need to speak with you privately," Catherine said to Daniel. "This is family business." "Sophie is family," Daniel said firmly. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of her." Catherine's mouth tightened. Then she looked at Sophie, really looked at her, and Sophie saw something calculated in her eyes. "Fine. I came here to make you an offer, Sophie. $5 million. You take the money, you sign new papers, and you give Daniel full custody of the child. You can visit, supervised, but Daniel will be the primary parent. The child will be raised as a Westbrook with all the advantages that brings. You can have money, freedom, and your daughter will want for nothing." The hallway went completely silent. Sophie felt like she'd been slapped. $5 million. More money than she'd ever dreamed of. Enough to never worry again, to go back to school, to have a real life. All she had to do was give up her daughter. "No," Sophie said. The word came out stronger than she expected. Catherine raised an eyebrow. "That's a lot of money to refuse. You're living in poverty, working minimum wage jobs. Be realistic about what you can offer this child versus what we can offer." "I can offer her a mother who loves her," Sophie said, her voice shaking now but determined. "I can offer her a home where she's wanted for who she is, not what she represents. And I'm not giving her up. Not for $5 million, not for $50 million. She's my daughter." "Our daughter," Daniel corrected quietly, stepping closer to Sophie's door. "And neither of us is giving her up." Catherine looked between them, and something shifted in her expression. "Daniel, be reasonable. You're not thinking clearly. This girl has trapped you." "Stop," Daniel said. "Just stop, Mother." "Sophie didn't trap me. You're the one who trapped her. You threatened her, paid her off, made her terrified to even speak my name. And you know what the worst part is? You kept my own child from me. Your grandchild. Do you have any idea how messed up that is? Catherine's composure cracked slightly. I was protecting you. From what? From being happy? From having a family? Daniel's voice softened, but there was still steel in it. I know you think you were doing the right thing. But you hurt people, Mom. You hurt Sophie, and you hurt me, and you almost hurt Mia by keeping us apart. For the first time since Sophie had met her, Catherine Westbrook looked uncertain. She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked down at her expensive shoes. I should meet her, Catherine finally said, so quietly that Sophie almost didn't hear. My granddaughter. I should meet her properly. Daniel looked at Sophie, a question in his eyes. It was Sophie's choice. Sophie thought about all the reasons to say no, all the ways this woman had hurt her, threatened her, tried to take everything away. She had every right to slam the door and never let Catherine Westbrook near her daughter. But Mia made a little cooing sound in her arms, and Sophie looked down at her. This tiny person who had Daniel's eyes and Sophie's nose and a whole future ahead of her. Did Sophie have the right to keep her from her grandmother? Even a grandmother who'd made terrible choices? Okay, Sophie said slowly. But not like this. Not with lawyers and threats and money. If you want to meet Mia, you come back tomorrow. Just you, no lawyers, no offers. Just a grandmother meeting her granddaughter.
Can you do that?
Catherine looked surprised, like she hadn't expected Sophie to agree at all. She nodded slowly. Tomorrow. Just me. One more thing, Sophie added, finding courage she didn't know she had. You apologize. To both of us. A real apology. Not for show. Not because Daniel is making you. Because you understand what you did was wrong. Catherine's jaw tightened, and for a moment Sophie thought she'd refuse. Then the older woman's shoulders sagged slightly. You're right, Catherine said, and she sounded tired. What I did was wrong. I thought I was protecting my son, but I was really just trying to control his life. I'm sorry, Sophie. And I'm sorry to you, Daniel. I should have trusted you to make your own decisions. It wasn't perfect, Sophie thought. It wasn't everything Catherine owed them, but it was a start. After Catherine and her lawyers left, Daniel stayed in the hallway with Sophie for a long moment. You didn't have to say yes, he said quietly. I know, Sophie replied, but Mia deserves to know her grandmother, even if her grandmother needs to learn how to be a better person first. Daniel smiled, and it was a real smile, not the corporate smile Sophie used to see him use at fancy dinners. You're amazing. You know that? Sophie felt her cheeks heat up. I'm just trying to do what's right for Mia. You're doing more than that, Daniel said. He reached out and gently touched Mia's cheek. The baby grabbed his finger and held on. You're teaching me how to be a parent. You're giving my mother a chance she doesn't deserve. You're being the bigger person when you have every right to slam doors. Well, Sophie said, trying to lighten the mood even though her heart was racing, someone has to be the adult in this situation. Daniel laughed, and the sound echoed in the dingy hallway of their apartment building. Sophie realized she hadn't heard him really laugh in 3 years. She'd missed that sound. Tomorrow's going to be interesting, Daniel said. That's one word for it, Sophie replied. But as she closed her door and got Mia ready for bed, Sophie felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out. All of them. Together. She looked at the $1 million still sitting untouched in her bank account. Money she hadn't spent because she didn't know what it meant. Was it child support? A gift? An obligation? Tomorrow, Sophie decided. Tomorrow she'd figure it out. Tomorrow Catherine would come back. Tomorrow they'd start building something new. But tonight, she just held her daughter and let herself believe that everything might actually be okay. Catherine Westbrook arrived at exactly 10 o'clock the next morning, just like she'd promised. But this time she was alone. No lawyers, no assistants, no expensive suits flanking her. She wore simple slacks and a blouse, and she was carrying a shopping bag that looked out of place in her perfectly manicured hands. Sophie opened the door slowly, still not entirely sure this was a good idea. Daniel stood beside her, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. Mia was in Sophie's arms, chewing on her favorite teething ring and completely unaware that she was about to meet her grandmother. Thank you for letting me come, Catherine said. Her voice was different than yesterday, quieter, less certain. Sophie stepped aside to let her in. Catherine walked into the small apartment and looked around. taking in the cramped space, the second-hand furniture, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter that Sophie had forgotten to hide. Sophie felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she lifted her chin. This was her home. It wasn't much, but it was hers. "She's beautiful," Catherine said, her eyes fixed on Mia. May I hold her?" Sophie hesitated. Every instinct told her to hold her baby closer, to protect her from this woman who'd tried to take everything from them. But she'd promised to give Catherine a chance. "Sit down first," Sophie said, gesturing to the couch. "Support her head. She's getting stronger, but she still needs help." Catherine sat down carefully, like she wasn't sure the old couch would hold her. Sophie gently transferred Mia into her grandmother's arms, staying close enough to take her back if needed. The moment Mia settled against Catherine's chest, something happened to the older woman's face. It crumpled. Tears started streaming down her cheeks and her whole body began to shake. "Oh," Catherine whispered, looking down at the baby. "Oh, she has Daniel's eyes. And your nose, Sophie. She's perfect." Mia looked up at this stranger and did something unexpected. She smiled. That gummy, drooly baby smile that made Sophie's heart melt every single time. Catherine let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Hello, Mia. I'm your grandmother, and I'm so sorry I missed the first 6 months of your life. That was very stupid of me." Daniel sat down on the other side of his mother, his expression complicated. Sophie could see he was still angry, still hurt, but there was something else there too. Relief, maybe, or hope. "I brought something," Catherine said, nodding toward the shopping bag she'd set down. "I don't know if it's appropriate. I don't know what babies need, but I wanted to bring something." Sophie opened the bag and pulled out a soft, hand-knitted blanket in pale yellow. It was beautiful, clearly expensive, but also clearly made with care. There was a card attached. "I made it myself," Catherine admitted. "Well, I tried to. I had to watch about 50 YouTube videos to figure it out. It's probably terrible compared to store-bought ones, but I wanted to make something for her with my own hands." Sophie ran her fingers over the blanket. It wasn't perfect. There were a few uneven stitches, a couple of small mistakes, but that somehow made it more precious. "It's beautiful," Sophie said honestly. "Thank you." They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Mia played with Catherine's necklace, completely content. Finally, Catherine spoke. "I need to explain something," she said, not looking away from the baby. Not as an excuse. "Just so you understand, when I was 23, I married Daniel's father. I came from nothing, just like you, Sophie. My parents were immigrants. We lived in a tiny apartment not unlike this one. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college." Sophie sat down in the chair across from them, surprised. She'd always assumed Catherine came from money. "When I married Richard, his mother hated me," Catherine continued. "She made my life miserable. Told me I wasn't good enough, that I'd trapped her son, that I was only after the family money. She tried to pay me to leave. When I refused, she made the first 5 years of my marriage hell." Daniel looked at his mother in shock. "I never knew that. I never told you," Catherine said. "By the time you were born, she'd finally accepted me, or at least stopped fighting me openly. But those years changed me. I became hard, protective, obsessed with making sure no one could hurt our family the way she hurt me." She finally looked up at Sophie. "When Daniel told me he was engaged to you, all I could see was history repeating itself. A young woman from a modest background marrying into money, and I convinced myself that you were like all the people who'd tried to use our family over the years. I didn't see you as a person. I saw you as a threat." "That doesn't make what you did okay," Sophie said quietly. "No, it doesn't," Catherine agreed. "I was wrong. Completely, terribly wrong. I became the same person who hurt me. I became Richard's mother, and I'm ashamed of that." Catherine carefully passed Mia back to Sophie, her hands lingering for a moment on the baby's soft hair. "I don't expect you to forgive me, either of you, but I want to try to make this right. Not with money or lawyers or control. I want to be in Mia's life if you'll let me. As a grandmother. Just a grandmother." Daniel cleared his throat. "Dad knows, doesn't he? About all of this." Catherine nodded. "He knew what I did to Sophie. He didn't approve, but he didn't stop me either. We've been married for 35 years, and this is the first time he's been truly angry with me. He told me that if I didn't fix this, he'd never forgive me." "Good," Daniel said simply. Sophie looked down at Mia, who was starting to get fussy. It was almost time for her nap. She thought about everything Catherine had said, about cycles of hurt and fear and protection that went too far. You can be in her life, Sophie said finally. But there are rules. No more trying to control us. No more paying people off or threatening legal action. You want to be Mia's grandmother? Then be a grandmother. Come to her birthday parties. Babysit sometimes. Teach her things. But you don't get to decide how Daniel and I raise her. I understand, Catherine said. And I agree completely. And one more thing, Sophie added, her voice stronger now. You need to help me understand the business world. Your world. Because whether you like it or not, I'm Mia's mother and I'm going to be part of this family. I won't be pushed aside or made to feel small. So you're going to teach me, deal? For the first time since she'd arrived, Catherine smiled. A real smile. Deal. I think I'd like that. Over the next few weeks, something unexpected happened. Catherine started coming by twice a week, always calling first, always asking if it was a good time. She'd sit on Sophie's worn couch and hold Mia while telling Sophie about how to navigate high society, business meetings, charity events. She taught Sophie which fork to use at fancy dinners and how to make small talk with board members. You have something I never had, Catherine told Sophie one afternoon while Mia napped between them. You have authenticity. You're genuine. Don't lose that when you learn all this other stuff. The world has enough fake people in expensive clothes. Sophie found herself actually enjoying these visits. Catherine had a sharp sense of humor when she wasn't trying to control everything. She told stories about Daniel as a child that made Sophie laugh until she cried. And she was surprisingly good with Mia, patient and gentle in a way Sophie never expected. Daniel watched this growing relationship with cautious optimism. He'd forgiven his mother, but he hadn't forgotten. Trust would take time. One evening, about 6 weeks after that first visit, Daniel knocked on Sophie's door with takeout from her favorite Thai place. They'd fallen into this routine, eating dinner together after Mia went to sleep, talking about their days. But tonight felt different. Daniel seemed nervous, fidgeting with his chopsticks, not quite meeting her eyes. What's wrong? Sophie asked. Nothing's wrong, Daniel said. I just need to talk to you about something. About us. Sophie's heart started racing. Us? Sophie were living across the hall from each other, co-parenting Mia, having dinner together every night. We're doing everything a couple does except... He trailed off, finally looking at her. Except being a couple. Sophie set down her food, her appetite suddenly gone. Daniel, we can't just pick up where we left off 3 years ago. Too much has happened. I know that, he said quickly. I'm not asking to pick up where we left off. I'm asking if we can start over. Properly this time. No family pressure, no secrets, no running away. Just us figuring out if what we had was real. It was real, Sophie said softly. At least it was for me. It was for me too, Daniel said. And I think it still is. But I want to do this right. I want to date you, Sophie. Take you to dinner. Movies. Normal things that normal couples do. I want Mia to see her parents actually building a relationship, not just going through the motions. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. I'm scared. What if it doesn't work? What if we try and fail? Mia's already attached to you. I don't want her to get hurt. I'm scared too, Daniel admitted. But I think not trying would hurt more. We owe it to ourselves and to Mia to see if we can be a real family. Sophie looked at this man who'd bought a rundown apartment just to be close to his daughter, who'd learned to change diapers and make bottles at 3 a.m., who'd stood up to his mother and protected Sophie when she needed it most. He wasn't the same person he'd been 3 years ago. Neither was she. Okay, she said, but we take it slow. Really slow. And if it doesn't work, we figure out how to co-parent as friends. Mia comes first, always. Always, Daniel agreed. He reached across the table and took her hand. Sophie let him, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. It felt familiar and new at the same time, so, Daniel said, a smile playing at his lips. Sophie Chen, would you like to go on a date with me this Saturday? There's this great Italian place downtown. We could get a babysitter, dress up, pretend we're normal people for a few hours. Sophie laughed. We're never going to be normal people. You're a billionaire CEO and I'm a waitress with a baby and trust issues. Perfect, Daniel said. Who wants to be normal anyway? Saturday sounds good, Sophie said. But I'm paying for half. I have $1 million in my bank account that I haven't touched because I didn't know what it meant. So I'm using some of it for our first date, deal? That money was for you and Mia, Daniel protested. I know. But let me do this. Let me contribute. It's important to me. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, you can pay for half. But I'm paying for the babysitter. Mrs. Rodriguez doesn't come cheap. Sophie smiled. This was going to work. Maybe not easily, maybe not perfectly. But they were going to try. For Mia, for themselves. For the family they were slowly building together. Across the hall in his own small apartment, Daniel went to bed that night feeling something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Real. Solid hope that his life was finally coming together the way it was supposed to. And in her crib, Mia slept peacefully, surrounded by people who loved her. She didn't know it yet, but she was the reason this whole messy, beautiful family had found their way back to each other. Sometimes the best things in life happen by accident, like a text message sent to the wrong number at 2 a.m, like $1 million that arrives with 6 simple words, like second chances that nobody expected but everyone needed. 6 months had passed since that first date at the Italian restaurant, and Sophie's life looked completely different now. Not because of the money, though, that had certainly helped. Not because Daniel had swept in and fixed everything, but because she'd learned that sometimes asking for help wasn't weakness. Sometimes it was the bravest thing you could do. It was a Saturday morning, and Sophie stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, adjusting her dress for the 3rd time. Today was special. Today was Mia's first birthday party, and everyone who mattered would be there. You look beautiful, Daniel said from the doorway. He'd used his key to let himself in, something Sophie had given him 2 months ago after deciding that knocking had become silly when he was there every day anyway. I look nervous, Sophie corrected, turning to face him. Your mother is bringing your father. My mom is coming. Rachel from the diner is bringing her kids. That's a lot of people in a very small apartment. About that, Daniel said, and something in his tone made Sophie's stomach flip. I need to talk to you about something before everyone gets here. Sophie's heart started racing. Over the past 6 months, things between them had been good. Really good. They'd taken it slow, just like she'd asked. Dates once a week that turned into twice a week. Holding hands that turned into goodnight kisses that made her toes curl. Co-parenting that felt less like a duty and more like a partnership, but they hadn't said the big words yet. Hadn't made any permanent plans. Sophie had been too scared to push for more, afraid that if she reached for too much, everything would disappear. Okay, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. What is it? Daniel walked over to her and took both her hands in his. I bought a house, Sophie blinked. What, a house? In a good neighborhood? Good schools? A backyard where Mia can play when she's older? 4 bedrooms, big kitchen, the whole thing. Sophie pulled her hands away, confusion and hurt warring in her chest. You're moving out? But I thought things were going well. Did I do something wrong? No, Sophie, wait, Daniel said quickly. I'm not explaining this right. I bought the house for us. For you, me, and Mia, together. As a family. Sophie stared at him. You bought us a house without asking me? I know how that sounds, Daniel said, running his hand through his hair in that way he did when he was stressed. But I wanted to do something right. Something big. To show you that I'm serious about this. About us. Daniel, Sophie said slowly, trying to process this. You can't just buy a house and expect me to move into it. We've been dating for 6 months. We haven't even talked about living together. I know, and you're right. I'm doing this backward. Daniel took a deep breath. Sophie, I love you. I've loved you since that day in the coffee shop 3 years ago, when you laughed at my terrible joke about espresso. I loved you when my mother made you leave, even though I didn't fight hard enough to keep you. I loved you when I saw you again with our daughter in your arms. And I love you now, watching you be the strongest, most incredible mother and partner I could have ever hoped for. Sophie felt tears welling up in her eyes. Daniel, wait, let me finish, he said. I bought the house, yes, but it's in your name. Yours, not mine. If you don't want to be with me, if this is moving too fast, the house is still yours. You and Mia can live there, and I'll stay in my apartment across the hall until this building falls down, or I'll move wherever you want me to be. Because what matters isn't the house. It's that you know I'm committed to you, to building a life together, whatever that looks like. Sophie couldn't speak. The tears were flowing freely now, and she didn't even care that she was ruining her makeup. I love you too, she finally managed to say. I've been so scared to say it because I didn't want to jinx anything, but I love you, Daniel. I love how you learned to braid Mia's hair even though you're terrible at it. I love how you do the dishes without being asked. I love how you've shown up every single day, proving that you're not going anywhere, and I love that you're kind of an idiot who buys houses without asking." Daniel laughed, relief flooding his face. "So that's a yes? You'll move in with me?" "Can I at least see the house first?" Sophie asked, wiping her eyes. "Actually," Daniel said, pulling out his phone, "I have pictures and a virtual tour, and I may have already checked that the schools in the district have good programs, and there's this park 2 blocks away with a playground." Sophie looked through the photos on his phone and her breath caught. It was beautiful. Not too big, not some mansion that would make her uncomfortable, just a real home with a garden and a porch and windows that let in lots of light. She could picture Mia taking her first steps in that living room. Could imagine birthday parties in that backyard. Could see herself and Daniel cooking together in that kitchen. "When can we see it?" she asked. "Tomorrow?" Daniel suggested. "After the party? We can take Mia, let her check out her new room. If you like it." "I already like it," Sophie said. "But yes, let's see it tomorrow." Daniel pulled her into his arms and kissed her. Not a goodnight kiss, not a careful first date kiss. This was a kiss that said, "I'm home and I'm yours and let's build a life together." They were interrupted by a knock on the door. Sophie pulled away, laughing and trying to fix her smudged makeup. "That'll be my mother," she said. "Fair warning, she's going to have opinions about everything." "I'm ready," Daniel said. "I faced your mom before. Remember that time she asked me about my intentions while holding a wooden spoon like a weapon?" Sophie's mother, Linda, swept into the apartment carrying what looked like 3 birthday cakes. "I couldn't decide which one Mia would like best, so I made all 3, she announced. "Where's my grandbaby?" Mia was in her high chair, wearing a little birthday dress that Catherine had bought, playing with her toes and generally being adorable. When she saw her grandmother, she squealed and reached out her arms. Over the next hour, the tiny apartment filled with people. Catherine and Richard arrived with enough presents to stock a toy store. Rachel showed up with her 3 kids who immediately started playing with Mia's toys. Mrs. Rodriguez from down the hall came with homemade tamales. Even Daniel's father, who Sophie had only met a handful of times, was there, looking uncomfortable but trying his best. Sophie watched it all from her spot in the kitchen, feeling overwhelmed in the best possible way. A year ago, she'd been alone in this apartment at 2 in the morning, desperate and scared. Now her home was full of noise and laughter and people who cared about her daughter. "Speech time," Rachel called out, and everyone turned to look at Sophie. "Oh, I don't have a speech prepared," Sophie protested. "Then wing it," Rachel said with a grin. Sophie picked up Mia and held her close. The baby grabbed a fistful of Sophie's hair, which she seemed to think was hilarious. "A year ago today," Sophie started, "this little person came into my life and changed everything. She made me stronger than I thought I could be. She taught me that love isn't about having everything figured out. It's about showing up every day and trying your best even when you're scared." She looked at Daniel. "And then 7 months ago, I accidentally sent a text message to the wrong number. Or maybe it was the right number. I don't know anymore. But that mistake brought people back into our lives who were meant to be here all along." Catherine wiped her eyes. Linda was openly crying. Even Richard looked emotional. "This past year hasn't been easy," Sophie continued. "There were hard conversations and hurt feelings and a lot of figuring things out. But we did it, all of us. We became a family. Not a perfect family, but a real one. And that's better than perfect any day." She raised her cup of juice since nobody was drinking alcohol at a baby's birthday party. "To Mia, happy birthday, baby girl. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." "To Mia," everyone echoed. They cut the cake, sang happy birthday off-key, and watched Mia smash her face into a cupcake with pure joy. She got frosting everywhere, her beautiful dress covered in pink icing and crumbs. Catherine took about 1,000 photos while Richard tried to figure out how to work the video camera on his phone. Later, after everyone had left and Mia was in bed exhausted from all the excitement, Sophie and Daniel stood on the small balcony of her apartment. Looking out at the city lights, "I have something else to tell you," Daniel said. Sophie groaned. "If you bought me a car or a boat or something else ridiculous." "No, nothing like that," Daniel interrupted. "I talked to my mother about the company, about creating a new position, Director of Community Outreach. It would focus on programs for single parents, helping them get access to childcare, education, job training, all the things you wished you'd had." Sophie turned to look at him. "And you want me to do it? You'd be perfect for it." You know exactly what these families need because you've lived it. And you've been taking those business classes with my mother. She says you have a real talent for this stuff. Catherine said that? Sophie asked, surprised. She did. She also said you argue with her more than anyone else on the board, which apparently she respects. Daniel smiled. You don't have to decide now. Just think about it. Sophie thought about the diner, the sore feet, the small tips, the exhaustion. Then she thought about being able to help other women like her. Women who were struggling and scared and doing their best. I'll think about it, she promised. They stood together in comfortable silence. Daniel's arm around her shoulders, Sophie leaning into his warmth. Hey, Daniel, Sophie said after a while. Yeah? Thank you for not giving up on me, on us. Thank you for sending that text message, Daniel replied. Best accident that ever happened to me. Inside the apartment, Mia made a small sound in her sleep. Both Sophie and Daniel instinctively moved toward the door, the parent reflex that had become second nature. I'll check on her, Daniel said. Sophie watched him go. This man who'd learned to be a father in the middle of everything else, who'd bought her a house and offered her a career and told her he loved her all in the span of an hour. A year ago, she'd been desperate enough to text an ex-boyfriend for help. Now she was standing in an apartment full of birthday decorations, planning to move into a real house with a man who loved her and a daughter who was healthy and happy. Life was funny that way. The moments that felt like rock bottom could actually be the beginning of something better. The mistakes that seemed terrible could turn out to be exactly what you needed. Sophie looked at her phone, at that old text message she'd never deleted. Please, I just need $200 for formula. And the response that had changed everything. No more cheap formula. I'm coming home. He had come home. They both had. And this time they were staying.